When someone no longer loves you, emotional withdrawal is often one of the first noticeable signs. In the beginning stages of a relationship, there's an eagerness to share feelings, thoughts, and experiences. You both make an effort to stay connected on a deeper level, talking about personal matters, discussing dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. The emotional closeness is what strengthens the bond and makes you feel like you're truly a part of each other's lives. However, when love begins to fade, this emotional availability starts to slip away. You might notice that they stop reaching out as much, or when they do, their responses are short or distant. The deep, meaningful conversations that once kept you connected become fewer and fewer. Instead of eagerly talking about their day or opening up about their struggles, they might brush it off with one-word answers or vague responses. It's no longer a priority for them to share personal insights or open up about their emotions. The emotional withdrawal can also show itself in physical ways. When someone is emotionally distant, they become less likely to show affection or care in the same way. They stop being present in moments when you need support or reassurance. Where once they would have been the person to comfort you when you were upset, they now seem preoccupied or uninterested, maybe even avoiding the conversation altogether. This gradual retreat can make you feel isolated, as if you're no longer seen or valued. The bond that was once strong starts to weaken, and you're left wondering if you've done something wrong, even though the shift is often more about their feelings fading than anything you've done. This emotional withdrawal doesn't always come with dramatic moments. Sometimes it's subtle. It's in the lack of a good morning text, the absence of thoughtful gestures, or the silence when you share something important. It's the feeling that you're slowly becoming more and more invisible in their life. As emotional withdrawal begins, surface-level conversations take the place of the deep, meaningful exchanges you once shared. In the beginning stages of a relationship, the conversations flow freely, touching on both light-hearted and serious topics. You talk about your hopes, your dreams, your vulnerabilities, and your past experiences, forming a bond that feels real and intimate. Those conversations help to create a deeper understanding of one another, allowing trust and emotional connection to grow. But when someone no longer feels the same level of love, the depth of those conversations starts to vanish. Instead of delving into meaningful discussions, the dialogue becomes more focused on trivial matters. Topics like what's on TV, what happened at work, or casual questions like how was your day might dominate the conversation. These exchanges lack the emotional substance that once tied you together, and you begin to notice that they're not as invested in what you have to say. It can be frustrating because it feels like the person you once shared everything with is now emotionally disengaged. They might give brief, non-committal responses to things you're passionate about, not asking follow-up questions or showing genuine interest in your thoughts. You find yourself talking more about the logistics of your day rather than your true feelings or desires. You try to bring up topics that matter to you, but they might quickly change the subject or give a vague, uninterested response. Over time, this shift becomes more noticeable. You can feel the gap widening, as if the conversation is no longer a bridge between two people who care deeply about each other, but more of a routine or an obligation. You start to sense that the emotional connection that once made your discussions so lively and engaging has been replaced with something less intimate, something far less meaningful. What used to be a place of vulnerability and exchange now feels more like a script, devoid of real emotion or genuine curiosity. In these moments, you might find yourself reflecting on what's changed. You think back to the conversations that once felt so effortless, and now everything feels forced. There's no spark, no depth, and the meaningful conversations you used to have seem like a distant memory. Instead, you're left with a sense that the emotional closeness you once shared has been replaced by a kind of polite, surface-level interaction that leaves you longing for the connection that used to be there. As emotional withdrawal begins, surface-level conversations take the place of the deep, meaningful exchanges you once shared. In the beginning stages of a relationship, conversations flow freely, touching on both light-hearted and serious topics. You talk about your hopes, your dreams, your vulnerabilities, and your past experiences, forming a bond that feels real and intimate. Those conversations help to create a deep deeper understanding of one another, allowing trust and emotional connection to grow. But when someone no longer feels the same level of love, the depth of those conversations starts to vanish. Instead of delving into meaningful discussions, the dialogue becomes more focused on trivial matters, topics like what's on TV, what happened at work, or casual questions like how was your day might dominate the conversation. These exchanges lack the emotional substance that once tied you together, and you begin to notice that they're not as invested in what you have to say. It can be frustrating because it feels like the person you once shared everything with is now emotionally disengaged. They might give brief, non-committal responses to things you're passionate about, not asking follow-up questions or showing genuine interest in your thoughts. You find yourself talking more about the logistics of your day rather than your true feelings or desires. You try to bring up topics that matter to you, but they might quickly change the subject or give a vague, uninterested response. Over time, this shift becomes more noticeable. You can feel the gap widening, as if the conversation is no longer a bridge between two people who care deeply about each other, but more of a routine or an obligation. You start to sense that the emotional connection that once made your discussions so lively and engaging has been replaced with something less intimate, something far less meaningful. What used to be a place of vulnerability and exchange now feels more like a script, devoid of real emotion or genuine curiosity. When someone no longer loves you, one of the most telling signs is a noticeable lack of interest in your life. In the early stages of a relationship, their curiosity about you seems boundless. They want to know everything about your world, what makes you tick, your deepest desires, your struggles, your triumphs. There's an eagerness to learn about your past, your future plans, and everything in between. Their attention feels constant, and you know you're on their mind because they ask about the little things that matter to you. The attention feels effortless, and you can't help but feel valued when someone takes that much interest in your day-to-day existence. But as time passes and their feelings begin to fade, you start to notice a change. The thoughtful questions become fewer, and the curiosity that once fueled their desire to know you better is replaced by indifference. They stop asking about your day, your work, your emotions, or even your well-being. What used to be a constant exchange of personal insights turns into a quiet, almost passive observation of your life. They may still ask the occasional, "How was your day?" but it feels more like an obligatory question than a genuine desire to connect. When someone is truly interested in you, they're invested in the details of your life, how you feel, what you're thinking, how you're navigating challenges. However, when that interest starts to wane, their questions become rote, and you may notice that even when you share something important or exciting with them, their response feels flat or disengaged. Their attention seems to wander, their eyes drift, or they might even become distracted by their phone or other things around them rather than being present with you in the moment. This lack of interest also manifests in their reaction to your emotions or experiences. When something exciting or challenging happens in your life, they might offer only a minimal response, or worse, show no reaction at all. It's as if your highs and lows no longer matter to them, and that sense of emotional support and shared joy fades away. This can leave you feeling invisible, as if the person you once relied on to truly see you is no longer invested in your life. You might find yourself sharing your thoughts or feelings only to be met with a lack of enthusiasm or empathy. There's no excitement in their voice, no effort to understand your perspective, and no desire to engage with you on a deeper emotional level. What once felt like a two-way exchange of emotional energy now feels lopsided, with you doing all the talking while they stand on the sidelines, passively observing. As this lack of interest continues, it can make you feel disconnected, as if the emotional investment you've made in the relationship is no longer being returned. You might begin to wonder why they're no longer making the effort to care about what's going on in your life. And that thought in itself is a painful realization of just how far apart you've grown.
When someone no longer loves you, one of the most noticeable changes is how much less time they spend with you. In the beginning of a relationship, time spent together feels like a priority. Whether it's sharing quiet evenings, going out on adventures, or simply enjoying each other's company, there's a sense that being with you is something they look forward to. Time seems to fly when you're together, and even small mundane moments are filled with meaning because they value the time spent with you. But as feelings begin to fade, their willingness to spend time with you starts to diminish. What once felt like an effortless and enjoyable commitment suddenly becomes something they seem to avoid or take less seriously. They might cancel plans more frequently, make excuses for why they can't meet up, or simply not show as much enthusiasm when it's time to see each other. The moments that once felt special now feel more like obligations, and you begin to sense that they no longer look forward to spending time with you in the same way. You might notice that they suddenly have more important things to do, whether it's work, friends, or other personal commitments that they didn't seem to prioritize before. Their schedules, which once included regular plans with you, now seem packed with activities that don't involve you at all. Even when you do manage to carve out time to spend together, you may feel that they are physically present but emotionally absent. Their mind might wander, they might be distracted by their phone, or they might seem disinterested in engaging with you, making you feel like you're competing for their attention rather than being the center of it. This shift in how they allocate their time can also be reflected in how often they initiate plans. In the past, they might have made the effort to suggest fun activities or surprise you with spontaneous dates. Now, the effort to plan or engage seems one-sided. You might find yourself taking the initiative more often while they become increasingly passive, only agreeing to plans without showing much enthusiasm. When someone no longer values the relationship, it's as though your time together becomes less precious to them, and the effort to nurture the connection diminishes. There's also this subtle change in how they react to the idea of spending time together. When someone is emotionally invested, they'll find joy in the smallest of moments with you. But when their feelings are no longer strong, they might become indifferent to the idea of just being with you, even when the opportunity presents itself. The excitement that once surrounded time together is replaced by a sense of apathy, and it starts to feel like they're fulfilling an obligation rather than genuinely enjoying your company. As this reduction in time together continues, you may find yourself wondering if they're even aware of how much they've pulled away, or if they've simply...
When someone no longer loves you, one of the most telling changes is how they start avoiding intimacy. In the early days of a relationship, physical and emotional closeness create a bond that feels secure and safe. Intimacy in all its forms, whether it's holding hands, sharing a quiet embrace, or expressing your deepest feelings, is an essential part of the connection. It's through intimacy that we experience a sense of being loved, cared for, and valued by another person. These moments create trust, security, and the emotional foundation that relationships rely on. However, as love fades, this intimacy becomes less and less frequent. You may start to notice that they no longer reach out to touch you in small, affectionate ways. The spontaneous hand-holding, the gentle touch on your arm, or the soft kiss on the forehead that once felt so natural now seem to be absent. What was once a comforting presence in the relationship begins to feel forced or non-existent. They might pull away when you try to initiate physical closeness, or when they do touch you, it feels distant or disconnected, as if the bond between you has weakened. Similarly, emotional intimacy begins to deteriorate. In the beginning, they were open, vulnerable, and willing to share their feelings, thoughts, and concerns, but as love fades, they may become increasingly closed off. When you try to talk about your emotions or the state of the relationship, they may avoid the conversation, change the subject, or give you vague, non-committal responses. They stop being as emotionally available, and you may feel like you're no longer someone they want to confide in. The emotional safety that once allowed both of you to be open and vulnerable has been replaced by walls that grow higher as time goes on. When someone no longer feels the same level of love, they may also begin to avoid more intimate moments, like sharing a private joke, expressing affection in front of others, or having deep heart-to-heart conversations. These were once the moments that bonded you both and made you feel seen and cherished. Instead, these once shared experiences now seem uncomfortable, and they may even find excuses to avoid them. You begin to feel like the intimacy you once had is slipping through your fingers, replaced by a kind of emotional and physical distance that makes you feel more like strangers than partners. You might try to rekindle the intimacy in the relationship, but their responses can be telling. They may react with indifference, making no effort to engage in a deeper connection, or they may actively push you away, either emotionally or physically. The warmth that once existed between you now feels cold and distant, and every attempt to restore that closeness seems to be met with resistance. It's as if they've withdrawn from you entirely, choosing to remain emotionally or physically unavailable, further driving a wedge between you. This avoidance of intimacy is not always abrupt. It often happens gradually over time, and it's the accumulation of these small changes that makes the absence of intimacy so noted. The lack of affection, the emotional distance, the hesitation to connect, it all points to one painful reality. They no longer love you in the same way, and intimacy, once the glue that held you together, has become something they no longer wish to share with you. When someone no longer loves you, a significant change that often occurs is a shift in their priorities. In the beginning stages of a relationship, both individuals tend to prioritize each other, finding ways to weave each other into the fabric of their daily lives. They make time for each other, go out of their way to accommodate each other's needs and share mutual experiences. There's a sense that the relationship is a central part of their life, and that it deserves attention, care, and effort. It feels like you're an essential part of their world, and they're willing to make adjustments to ensure that you're always included in the important moments. However, as feelings change and love begins to fade, the priorities that once placed you at the top of their list begin to shift. They may become more absorbed in other aspects of their life that seem to take precedence over spending time with you. Work, personal goals, or friendships that didn't seem as important before now start to take up more of their energy and focus. You might notice that they're spending more time at the office or engaging in activities that leave little room for you in their schedule. It's as if the relationship, which once felt like a priority, is now something they're willing to put on the back burner in favor of other things. This shift is not always overt or intentional, but it becomes increasingly evident in their actions. They start making plans that don't involve you, often without considering how it impacts your relationship. They may agree to spend time with friends or engage in solo activities without even asking if you'd like to join or if you have plans of your own. The consistency you once had in each other's lives begins to break down, and you start to feel like you're no longer a central part of their world. It's not that they're necessarily doing anything wrong, it's just that they've stopped making you a priority. The lack of effort to maintain the relationship becomes clear when they fail to make time for you. You might suggest an outing, a trip, or a quiet evening together, but their response is often one of indifference, and they're quick to suggest other things to do that don't involve you. Their hesitation to prioritize you might also show in their emotional availability. Even when they do have time, they seem distracted or disconnected, their focus divided between other things in their life that have become more important than nurturing the bond between you two. Even when they do make time for you, it might not feel like genuine quality time. You might notice they're present physically, but their attention is elsewhere, whether it's on their phone, on work, or on something outside of the relationship. What once was a comfortable, deep connection now feels like a mere formality. Their priorities are no longer aligned with yours, and you begin to feel like an afterthought in their life. The sense that you're no longer a priority in their world is painful, especially when you once felt so valued and essential. The shift in priorities often happens slowly, and it's the gradual nature of it that makes it harder to confront. But over time, it becomes impossible to ignore. Similarly, emotional intimacy begins to deteriorate. In the beginning, they were open, vulnerable, and willing to share their feelings, thoughts, and concerns. But as love fades, they may become increasingly closed off. When you try to talk about your emotions or the state of the relationship, they may avoid the conversation, change the subject, or give you vague, non-committal responses. They stop being as emotionally available, and you may feel like you're no longer someone they want to confide in. The emotional emotional safety that once allowed both of you to be open and vulnerable has been replaced by walls that grow higher as time goes on. When someone no longer feels the same level of love, they may also begin to avoid more intimate moments, like sharing a private joke, expressing affection in front of others, or having deep heart-to-heart conversation. These were once the moments that bonded you both and made you feel seen and cherished. Instead, these once shared experiences now seem uncomfortable, and they may even find excuses to avoid them. You begin to feel like the intimacy you once had is slipping through your fingers, replaced by a kind of emotional and physical distance that makes you feel more like strangers than partners. You might try to rekindle the intimacy in the relationship, but their responses can be telling. They may react with indifference, making no effort to engage in a deeper connection, or they may actively push you away, either emotionally or physically. The warmth that once existed between you now feels cold and distant, and every attempt to restore that closeness seems to be met with resistance. It's as if they've withdrawn from you entirely, choosing to remain emotionally or physically unavailable, further driving a wedge between you. This avoidance of intimacy is not always abrupt. It often happens gradually, over time, and it's the accumulation of these small changes that makes the absence of intimacy so noticeable. The lack of affection, the emotional distance, the hesitation to connect, it all points to one painful reality. They no longer love you in the same way. And intimacy, once the glue that held you together, has become something they no longer wish to share with you. When someone no longer loves you, criticism often becomes more frequent, and it's one of the most noticeable changes in the dynamic of the relationship. In the early stages, even if there were occasional disagreements, there was a sense of understanding and acceptance. Each person was willing to overlook minor flaws and focus on the positive aspects of the other. Compliments were frequent, and any criticisms were gentle and constructive, aimed at improving the relationship or resolving small issues without creating tension. However, as feelings change and love begins to fade, the tone of the relationship shifts and criticism becomes sharper and more frequent. What once felt like support and encouragement starts to feel like judgment or condemnation. Small quirks or behaviors that were once endearing may now become the focal point of their complaints. They might point out things you never noticed about yourself, whether it's the way you dress, how you speak, or the things you do. These criticisms often seem to come out of nowhere, and they can be hurtful, leaving you questioning whether the person you're with even sees you in a positive light anymore. What makes this criticism especially painful is that it often feels unnecessary or disproportionate to the situation. They may exaggerate small faults and make them seem more significant than they actually are. You might hear them say things like, "You always do this," or "You never do that," which makes you feel like you're constantly failing to meet their expectations. The once supportive and affirming environment you once had becomes more of a place where you feel under constant scrutiny, as if they are finding fault in everything you do. Over time, this criticism can erode your confidence and sense of self-worth. The things that were once part of who you are, the things that made you feel unique and loved, start to feel like flaws that you can't escape. When someone no longer loves you, they may become more focused on pointing out your imperfections rather than celebrating your strength. They may also withhold the praise or gratitude they once gave freely, making you feel like nothing you do will ever be enough to earn their approval or affection. What can be particularly damaging is that the criticism is often no longer constructive or aimed at resolving an issue. Instead, it becomes a tool to distance themselves from you, a way to highlight your perceived shortcomings and create emotional distance. It's as if they are trying to justify their feelings of disconnection by focusing on what they don't like about you, rather than understanding why those flaws might have appeared or been overlooked before. In some cases, the criticism can even take on a more passive-aggressive tone, where they don't directly attack you, but instead make subtle remarks that suggest you're not measuring up to some unspoken standard. They might compare you to others either directly or indirectly, creating a sense of competition or inadequacy. The result is a relationship where you feel constantly on edge, uncertain of whether your actions will be met with approval or with more criticism. As time goes on, you might find that you start to internalize these criticisms, feeling as though there's something wrong with you. The love and affection that once made you feel secure in the relationship are replaced by feelings of doubt and insecurity. The constant stream of negative comments creates a cycle that's hard to break, leaving you questioning your worth and wondering if you'll ever be able to earn back the love and admiration that once came so freely. This shift in how they perceive you is a painful reminder that the emotional connection you once shared is no longer the same. When someone no longer loves you, one of the most difficult things to experience is indifference. In the beginning stages of a relationship, emotions are intense and every interaction feels charged with meaning. There's a deep investment in how the other person feels, and their emotions seem to be at the forefront of your mind. You care about their day, their challenges, their joys, and their well-being. You celebrate their successes and support them through their struggles. The relationship feels vibrant because both of you are emotionally present, attentive, and eager to nurture what you share. However, when love fades, the emotional intensity diminishes and you begin to feel the painful shift of indifference. The once enthusiastic responses to your texts or calls turn into mere acknowledgements, or worse, silence. When you try to share something important or express your emotions, there's a lack of engagement and it feels as though you're talking to a wall. Their response is neutral, almost distant, and you begin to realize that they no longer care in the same way. The warmth that once filled your conversations and interactions is replaced by cold indifference, and it's the most painful form of emotional detachment. What's particularly hard about indifference is that it's not as obvious as outright rejection or anger. There's no confrontation, no explosive argument, no dramatic separation. Instead, it's the absence of the affection, interest, and care that once defined your connection. They're simply no longer emotionally invested, and the lack of response, effort, or passion feels like a subtle yet suffocating reminder that they're no longer interested in being a part of your emotional world. It's as if your thoughts, feelings, and experiences no longer matter to them, and that silence can speak louder than any words could. You may also notice that their actions no longer reflect the love or commitment they once had. They stop making the effort to spend time with you, to listen to you, or to engage in the things that used to bring joy to both of you. Their indifference shows itself in their lack of curiosity about your life, your dreams, or your challenges. It becomes clear that they're no longer emotionally present, and the things that once brought you closer together are no longer on their radar. The absence of affection also becomes a defining characteristic of indifference. When you're together, you may notice that there's a lack of physical closeness, like hugs, kisses, or even eye contact that once felt intimate. The connection that was once so natural now feels forced or absent entirely. You find yourself wondering if you've become invisible to them, or if your needs for love and closeness are no longer something they're willing to fulfill. This indifference can also extend to how they respond to your emotional state. In the past, they might have been the first person to comfort you when you were upset, listen to your worries, or offer support when things got tough. But now they seem unaffected, as if your emotions no longer impact them. It's as if your happiness or sadness is irrelevant to them, and their once genuine concern has been replaced by apathy. The emotional bond that held you together begins to unravel, and you start to feel like you're no longer an important part of their life. Indifference can be far more painful than outright anger or rejection because it leaves you feeling unseen, unimportant, and unloved. When someone no longer cares enough to even be angry or upset, it signals the complete collapse of the emotional connection that once defined the relationship. You might find yourself desperately trying to reignite that spark, but no matter how hard you try, the indifference remains quiet, suffocating, and ever-present. It is a stark reminder that the love you once shared is no longer there, and no amount of effort can change that.
When someone no longer loves you, one of the clearest signs is the gradual decrease in effort. At the start of a relationship, both people tend to give their best. They show up with enthusiasm, going out of their way to make the other person feel loved, valued, and appreciated. Whether it's through thoughtful gestures, surprise gifts, planning exciting dates, or simply being present when needed, the effort feels natural because both partners are invested in building a strong, lasting connection. There's a sense that both people are equally committed, working together to create something meaningful. However, as time goes on and feelings fade, this effort becomes less and less visible. It might not happen all at once, but you'll begin to notice that the small acts of kindness, the spontaneous compliments, or the attempts to make each other's lives a little easier gradually disappear. Things that used to feel effortless, like reaching out to check in or making time to spend together, now feel like burdens or obligations. The person you're with may start to take you for granted, assuming that their presence is enough to sustain the relationship without putting in the same level of effort they once did. You might see this lack of effort in their response to your needs. When someone loves you, they're quick to acknowledge when you're going through something difficult, and they take steps to show their support, whether it's a simple, "How are you feeling?" or offering a hand in helping you solve a problem. But when love fades, that attentiveness diminishes. They might no longer ask about your day, your well-being, or what's going on in your life. Instead, their responses may be short or indifferent, as if they're simply going through the motions rather than genuinely connecting with you. In conversations, you may find that they no longer make an effort to engage with you in a meaningful way. Where once there was excitement about sharing ideas, dreams, or funny stories, now it feels like there's a lack of interest. They may seem distracted, offering little more than one-word answers or vague comments, which makes it harder to connect with them. You can sense that they're not fully present in the conversation, and that disconnect can leave you feeling lonely, even when you're physically together. Another sign of diminishing effort is their lack of initiative when it comes to making plans or spending time together. In the past, they might have been the one to suggest a date, invite you to do something spontaneous, or make plans for the future. But now, the effort to make those plans has faded. You might find yourself constantly taking the lead, suggesting ideas, or initiating contact, while they seem to wait for you to make the effort. What was once a shared responsibility in the relationship now feels like it's falling solely on your shoulders, and that imbalance can be discouraging. Even when they do show up, the quality of time spent together changes. Instead of focusing on each other and enjoying each other's company, they might seem distracted or disengaged. They could be checking their phone, thinking about something else, or simply not contributing to the energy of the moment. This lack of effort isn't just about physical actions, it's also reflected in emotional availability. When someone is no longer invested, they're less likely to open up, share vulnerabilities, or show affection, making the relationship feel increasingly one-sided. What is especially painful about the decreasing effort is that it often goes unnoticed until it becomes a pattern. At first, it may seem like they're just having a busy week or distracted by other responsibilities. But as time goes on, it becomes clear that the once vibrant connection between you is slowly fading. It feels like you're the only one still trying to make things work, while the person you care about isn't willing to put in the same amount of effort. The realization that the effort is no longer mutual is difficult to accept, but it's an undeniable sign that the emotional investment in the relationship has changed.
When someone no longer loves you, one of the most heartbreaking shifts is the loss of connection. In the early stages of a relationship, there's a deep sense of being intertwined with one another, where every conversation feels meaningful, every touch feels intimate, and every shared experience strengthens the bond. The connection you feel with each other is intense and alive, and it's through this connection that trust, understanding, and love grow. You become each other's confidant, best friend, and partner, and there's an unspoken sense that you belong together, sharing the highs and lows of life. However, as feelings fade, that connection starts to weaken, often imperceptibly at first, until one day you realize it's no longer there. What once felt like a natural, effortless bond begins to feel strained, and the distance between you grows. Even when you're physically close, you may start to notice that your conversations feel flat, lacking the depth and energy they once had. Where you once shared your dreams, hopes, and deepest feelings, now there are awkward silences, or the topics you discuss feel surface level and detached. It's as if you've lost the ability to connect on the same emotional wavelength, and no matter how hard you try, the spark that once existed is nowhere to be found. The loss of connection is also reflected in how you spend time together, where once you would be able to talk for hours without realizing how much time had passed, now you might find yourselves in the same room but unable to engage meaningfully. The comfortable silences that once felt warm and familiar now feel uncomfortable and isolating. It's as if the space between you has become charged with an unspoken tension, and you can't seem to bridge the gap that has emerged. What was once easy and natural now requires effort, and no matter how hard you try, it feels like you're unable to reconnect. Emotional intimacy, which once thrived between the two of you, starts to dissolve. You may try to reach out, hoping to share something personal or to ask for support, but they may respond with indifference, or worse, avoidance. Their emotional distance becomes palpable, and it feels as though they are no longer invested in being there for you in the way they once were. When someone no longer loves you, they often stop being emotionally available, and even the most vulnerable or important conversations seem to fall flat. They might not share their thoughts or feelings with you anymore, and when you express yours, they seem distant, disinterested, or uncomfortable. This shift in emotional closeness can also manifest in a lack of empathy. You might notice that when you're struggling, they're not as quick to offer comfort or support. Where they once would have been the first person to notice when something was wrong, they now seem oblivious, or even if they do notice, they may not show much concern. The emotional safety you once felt in the relationship is gone, leaving you feeling exposed, lonely, and unsupported. Even the physical connection that once felt so natural and affirming starts to fade. Small gestures like holding hands, hugging, or a comforting touch, which once communicated affection and closeness, become less frequent. The warmth that once existed between you feels like it's been replaced by coldness. You may even start to feel like strangers, unable to bridge the emotional gap that has formed between you, and the physical space between you becomes more pronounced as well. The loss of connection is particularly painful because it's often gradual, creeping in without you realizing it until the distance feels insurmountable. At first, there might still be moments where you feel the bond, where you catch glimpses of the connection that once was, but these moments become fewer and farther between, and the feeling of disconnection takes over. No matter how much you try to rekindle that closeness, you start to feel that it's no longer possible. The relationship that once felt like a deep, meaningful partnership now feels like a hollow echo of what it used to be, and that sense of loss can be overwhelming. The feeling that you're no longer seen, heard, or understood by the person you once shared everything with is a painful reminder that the emotional bond has faded away. When someone no longer loves you, one of the most striking changes in their behavior is their non-reactive attitude. In the beginning of a relationship, both people are highly engaged, showing interest and emotional involvement in each other's lives. When something significant happens, whether it's a milestone, an exciting piece of news, or even a challenging moment, they react. Their responses are emotional, sometimes excited or compassionate, reflecting the depth of their connection. They're engaged with what's happening, and their emotional reactions are a sign of their care and investment in the relationship. However, as feelings begin to fade, the emotional engagement starts to wane, and you begin to notice their reactions, or rather, their lack of reaction. In moments when you expect them to be excited, supportive, or even just emotionally present, they seem distant, indifferent, or passive. Whether it's a moment of joy, surprise, frustration, or even sadness, they no longer seem to be emotionally moved by what happens in your life. They may respond with a simple, "That's nice," or offer little to no reaction at all. Their ability to empathize or even engage emotionally becomes numb, and the once dynamic exchanges now feel one-sided and disconnected. This non-reactive behavior is particularly noticeable when something important happens to you. If you share a significant achievement like a career milestone or personal victory, you may expect them to celebrate with you or express some form of pride or excitement. Instead, their response might be lukewarm at best, leaving you feeling like your accomplishments are not worthy of attention or praise. The lack of enthusiasm or emotional investment in your achievements can be heartbreaking, as it shows that they no longer feel the joy or excitement that once came with your successes. Likewise, during moments of difficulty or challenge, when you need their support or understanding, their non-reactive behavior can be even more painful. In times when you're feeling vulnerable or need comfort, you might find them emotionally absent, offering no support or concern. Where they once would have been quick to listen, offer a hug, or reassure you, now they seem disconnected, as if they're simply going through the motions of being there without any real emotional investment. Their response to your distress might be minimal, or they may brush it off with a comment that feels dismissive, as though your emotions no longer matter to them. This lack of reaction also shows up in how they handle conflict. In the past, disagreements or misunderstandings would spark an emotional response, whether it's frustration, empathy, or even a desire to resolve the issue. However, when love fades, the emotional engagement in these moments decreases, and they might stop reacting to the conflict altogether. Instead of addressing the issue, they might ignore it, withdraw, or show little concern for resolving things. Their non-reactive attitude during a disagreement often indicates that they are no longer invested in working through the problem and are instead emotionally distancing themselves further. When they stop reacting emotionally, you might also find that they've become less communicative. They may no longer initiate conversations, and when you try to talk to them about something important, their responses are brief or disinterested. What once felt like an engaging, interactive conversation now feels more like a one-sided effort. It's as if they're no longer moved by what you have to say, and their lack of reaction to your words feels like a subtle form of rejection. Non-reactive behavior is often the result of emotional withdrawal. It's not necessarily that the person is angry or hostile. It's more that they've become emotionally detached. They no longer feel the need to react to what's happening around them because they no longer feel the emotional pull of the relationship. This detachment is one of the clearest signs that their feelings for you have changed, as it reflects their growing disinterest in staying emotionally connected with you. It can be incredibly isolating to witness this shift, as it feels as though you are speaking into an emotional void with no response, no recognition, and no care. The silence, the lack of reaction, speaks volumes about how much the emotional bond between you has deteriorated. When someone no longer loves you, one of the most challenging things to experience is the recognition that the relationship has changed. Often this change is gradual, and it takes time before the signs are unmistakable. Initially, there may be moments where you feel the shift, but you may hold on to the hope that things will return to normal, that the connection will reignite. However, as time passes, you begin to see more and more signs that things are not the same, and the realization starts to sink in. They no longer feel the same way about you. Acknowledging the change is a painful process because it forces you to face the reality of the situation. You can no longer deny that the dynamic between you has shifted, and all the things you once took for granted, the closeness, the shared goals, the emotional connection, are no longer present in the same way. Where there used to be excitement about spending time together, there's now a noticeable distance. The attention that was once so effortless has faded, and the effort to keep the relationship strong is no longer mutual. What makes acknowledging this change so difficult is that it often feels like a betrayal. The person you trusted, the one you shared so much with, seems to have emotionally checked out. The feeling of being left behind is profound, and it's hard to accept that someone who once loved you so fully can now be so distant, indifferent, or even emotionally absent. It's as if the foundation of everything you built together has started to crumble, and you're left to pick up the pieces while the other person has already moved on, either emotionally or physically. This acknowledgement often comes with a deep sense of confusion. You might replay moments in your mind trying to pinpoint when the shift happened. You might ask yourself if you missed a sign, or if there was something you could have done to prevent it. Unfortunately, this kind of introspection rarely provides the clarity you're looking for. Relationships are complex, and feelings change for many reasons. Sometimes because of external stresses, other times because the individuals involved have simply grown apart. It's not always easy to pinpoint when love faded, but the realization that it has is unmistakable once you see it. As you start to acknowledge the change, you may find that the emotional withdrawal is accompanied by a lack of effort on their part. They might stop planning activities together, stop engaging in deep conversations, or stop being as affectionate as they once were. At first, you might try to make excuses for them, believing they're just going through a tough time. But over time, their disinterest becomes undeniable, and you start to see that it's not just a temporary phase. It's a long-term shift in their feelings toward you. This can be incredibly disheartening because it's a sign that the emotional connection that once felt so strong is no longer there. Additionally, this acknowledgement often brings feelings of loneliness and isolation. Even if the other person is physically present, their emotional distance creates a chasm that you can't cross. You may try to reach out to them, express your concerns, or have a conversation about the changes you're noticing, but their responses may be lacking the emotional depth and concern that once characterized your exchanges. It's as if they are no longer invested in fixing things, in rekindling the connection, or in putting in the effort to revive what has been lost. Another aspect of acknowledging the change is the realization that your needs are no longer being met in the same way. Relationships evolve and people grow, but love requires continual effort from both parties. When one person stops contributing emotionally, physically, or mentally, it creates an imbalance that's difficult to ignore. You might start feeling like you're the only one holding up the relationship, trying to maintain the bond, while the other person has withdrawn or disengaged. The realization that this imbalance is no longer temporary, but part of a larger shift, forces you to confront the painful truth that you are no longer loved in the way you once were. The hardest part of this process is understanding that you can't force someone to love you, and that love can fade without warning. It's a realization that forces you to reevaluate the relationship, to consider what you truly want, and to decide whether you're willing to continue trying to keep something alive that the other person no longer wants to nurture. It's a painful reckoning, and it often leads to deep introspection about what love really is, what you need from a relationship, and whether this relationship can offer you the emotional fulfillment and connection that you deserve.